Hello, and welcome to Traverse. My name is Franziska Airy. I'm a theatre and opera director talking to you from the Ram Theatre in Budapest, Hungary. Every week I'll be talking to different industry professionals from all over the world about their careers, the shifts and adjustments they had to make during this pandemic, and their hopes and dreams for the future. This is Traverse. What's next for our industry?
Today, I'm talking to director, producer, and coach Elaine Kidd, who is the head of the Jette Parker Young Artist Programme at the Royal Opera House in Covent Garden. Every 2 years, the programme welcomes young singers, repetiteurs, and a director into the building for coaching, training, and numerous opportunities to perform on the building's prestigious stages. In 2020, like most venues in the world, the Royal Opera House had to close its doors to the public. But the Young Artist Programme continued to operate, and Elaine's team has been working hard to continue their work with young talent, both in person and online.
Hi Elaine, how are you?
I'm great, Franziska. How are you?
I'm good. Where are you at the moment?
I'm in my flat in South London, in Stockwell, Brixton area.
And what's the situation in terms of COVID where you are right now?
It's still a challenge. We are in the middle of rehearsal at the moment, but rehearsals are with everybody 2 meters apart and fully masked at all times.
What are you rehearsing at the moment?
We're rehearsing Seven Deadly Sins and Mahagoni Songspiel into the vacuum created by bigger projects that can't happen because of COVID, jumps the Jette Parker Young Artists Programme. So we're on the main stage at the moment. So we've been promoted. There was a horrible week where we got kicked out of our theatre, which was the Lindbury Theatre, our chamber space. And this is a project that we had on the go for over 2 years, 2 years, 3 years. We knew we were going to do this show. So when it suddenly got taken out of the Lindbury due to COVID and the complications, there was a whole week where it wasn't possible to reschedule it, even within the next 2 year period, by which time all the artists who'd learnt it and prepared it would be gone from us anyway. And that was a very scary time. And then suddenly the main stage became available for it instead, and it was all systems ahead making it happen for the main stage. So we're in week 1 of production of 2 in the studio. The stage manager has a 2 meter stick just to remind everybody going around that they can't get too close. And the only time the singers are allowed to remove their masks is either for a completely static musical run through where they then have to be 3 meters apart, or the final stage orchestra rehearsals and the general.
Wow.
So it's really tough because they can't really hear each other. They can't hear themselves in the same way either. So in terms of, there's quite a lot of ensemble work and blended voices. So it's quite tricky for everyone. And we also, obviously it's an international programme. So we've got quite a lot of artists who aren't first language English speakers, and they can't lip read anymore. So they're standing a long way away from the person who's speaking to them, giving them instructions, and they can't always really hear what's being said to them at that distance. And certainly without we've got so used to lip reading being a part of how we understand a language. Yeah. And the director is also having to trust that when the masks come off at the stage orchestra, that the performance, the facial performance and the psychological performance as visible on the face will be at the right pitch. So, you know, it's challenging. I'm kind of glad I'm not directing it.
It sounds almost impossible. Well, who actually comes up with these rules of like having a stage manager with a stick? Like what sort of information, or who's monitoring the information coming into the house?
Well, we're a big institution, so it's a lot of people involved in making that decision. We've got health and safety officers. We've also got, there's a specialist who a lot of the UK companies are using in theatre, who's become a bit of a consultant to all of us, because he's done the deepest level of research and is advising us all on how to work. So we're basically taking his guidance predominantly and then making it work for our spaces. And you know, it's a bit of a joke to say the stage manager with a stick. He happens to have a 2 meter long stick, which is great for using for markouts. But actually it's also good for reminding people what 2 meters looks like when we're slightly we're taking a liberal approach to that 2 meters.
Which probably happens all the time, because when you're working and you get into a scene, it's really hard to, on top of everything that a singer has to think about, also think about the restrictions that are in place.
Yeah, it's pretty impossible. But the amazing thing is, whenever I ask for a report from the rehearsal room, because again, I can't just drop in like I would normally, I have to book a slot to go and see it and make sure that the spare space to watch from is available, because I can't go in the same day as the designer or the surtitles person or who else. You know, we only have so much access to what's going on in the room. We can join via Zoom. It's obviously not the same thing, particularly when you're seeing people as little specks on a screen. But what I hear is that the mood in the room is fantastic, because everyone's just so happy to be working and to be creative. So everyone's doing really well. But, you know, chapeau, really. That's not easy.
Yeah, and especially with opera, where there's so many different people involved in one single production and always want to check in and always have an input, it must be so difficult to kind of wait your turn to be able to get into that room and just have your input and then dart out again. Is this going to be something that we'll be able to see live with a live audience?
No. Live, as in we're doing it as a live stream. Essentially, it's all being done on the day, on the evening. And that'll go out on April the 9th. And the cameras are in to watch it for the first time on April the 7th. So they have their practice on the 7th, the 8th to adjust the camera script and any other issues that have come up. And then the 9th, bang it out.
You guys are so prepared. I feel like you can tell that everyone's been waiting in the wings to make something happen. So everyone is so on it now that you actually have a project to show to the audience.
Yeah, we really are on it, and it's a lot of people with a lot of enormous goodwill and excitement about going the extra mile to make this happen. We're sort of the advanced party before the rest of the Royal Opera kicks in and has to work under the same protocols. So, you know, we're very happy guinea pigs. We're the lucky ones who are able to work on a full production, you know.
Yes, I can imagine. And actually, let's talk about the Jette Parker Young Artist Program, because we kind of launched into this conversation, and I'm so excited about this production. But for those of the people who might not know about the Royal Opera House's Young Artist Program, would you mind telling us a little about how it works, who is actually involved in it, and what is the sole purpose of the program?
There's definitely no sole purpose. We're constantly growing tentacles to have multiple purposes. But essentially, we're in our 19th year, and we have a crack squad of singers, conductors and directors who stay with us for 2 years as company members, and they're involved in main stage productions. So they might have a small role, sometimes they have a large role, or they'll have a cover, or they'll do something in the chamber theatre that we have, or a recital. And around that, they're getting coaching all the time so that they really are at the top of their game. So they're working like any other Royal Opera House guest artist. So sometimes they're on stage next to, you know, Juan Diego Flores or Joyce DiDonato, and having to hold their own in that capable arena. So it's very high pressured, but we make sure that they fully have the support to really deliver. It's normally the first professional work they have outside of training. Not always. Sometimes people come to us later, but very often they'll finish conservatoire, maybe have a year out doing some professional work and then come to us. But it's very competitive, so we audition. In the past, we've auditioned for the programme. We've had to cancel auditions this year, so next year we're running things slightly differently. But it's very competitive to get in, and they stay with us and become really part of a family.
What was that like in the middle of a pandemic?
Yeah, well, the initial period was really scary. I remember spending 2 solid days physically shaking because I wasn't sure whether I still had budget. And with operating via Zoom, and a lot of people immediately going on furlough once the government announced the furlough scheme in the UK, suddenly your colleagues who you'd go to about something weren't there. And you didn't know whether you still had access to your funding, whether it was going to be used for something else. And obviously our young artists plug into the main operations of the Royal Opera House, and suddenly all those operations were gone. So I had to find out what I was and wasn't allowed to do. Were they still allowed to come in? Was training allowed on furlough? Because they were immediately furloughed. And there was a lot of uncertainty, like for everyone. But the great thing was we eventually realised that, you know, we did still have our funding. Training was still allowed, so we were then allowed to do lots of things with our young artists, some of them in person, particularly if they lived in London or were stranded in London and couldn't get back to home countries. Some of them decided to go back home, and we started coaching them remotely. But we also were incredibly aware of relationships with freelancers. So, you know, at least our guys were connected to an institution and felt that they had this network of people who were looking out for them and trying to make things happen for them. Whereas freelancers didn't have that same level of support or opportunity. So we tried to immediately go, what can we do for our freelancers we're connected to as well? So it was quite a stimulating time, because we had to think quickly on our feet about what would be of value for people. So we ran some courses for directors, some courses for conductors. Later in the year, we did some women's empowerment courses. We created some digital opportunities to do some short filmed operas. So again, bringing new talent in, not just for our existing artists on the programme. And we just tried whole new ways of working, and it was really exciting. And we were incredibly lucky to be able to do that. And because the house wasn't involved in its usual activities, we had all the resources of the different departments who were suddenly there and available potentially if we could persuade them to come on board for a project, and which they, you know, did willingly. So we were really lucky. We transferred all of one of our projects that was due to be in the flesh. We transferred the whole of it to digital, and did a lot of live streaming. And again, I actually think it was of extra benefit to our artists, because of it, instead of doing a crush room recital to 120 people in the flesh, suddenly they were performing and getting, you know, 60,000 viewers.
This is our house to your house, is that correct?
Well, that was one aspect of the main Royal Opera work, which some of our guys were involved in with Tony Pappano, doing some concerts from the main stage. But we also had our own Meet the Young Artists Week, where we were occupied the Linbury Theatre for a week. And every night we had cameras in, and we had a presenter, and we were able to tell the stories of the individual artists and how it had been for them during COVID, and show a little bit more behind the scenes stuff, as well as them being able to share their voices and their art. So it was a really nice week. Exhausting, but really exciting. I mean, I feel I'm overusing the word exciting, because we have had a really fortunate time being able to do activity after activity, and most people have not had that. And the wonderful thing is that all the artists know very deeply just how blessed they are to have had these opportunities. So, you know, there's that warmth and gratitude for the opportunities they get, and for everyone behind the scenes who's supporting them to be able to share their artistry. So there's a really warm feeling, and that sort of overcomes the fear and the pressures that they're also having to encounter.
Yes, and let's expand a little bit about this digitalization. Was there any guidance about that, like how you actually make it happen? Because I assume that making online work is completely different than just, you know, performing on stage. And as you said, it's a completely different audience as well. So the way you market it, and the way the different channels it actually reaches, it must have been a lot of things that you had to almost learn on the go.
Totally. I mean, we're still learning on the go, Francisca. We're actually doing a project at the moment in collaboration with the National Ballet of Canada and the Canadian Opera Company and CERT, which is a tech company in Canada. And we and they are putting a group of artists together to explore making some micro commissions for the screen, but based on technologies. So, you know, virtual reality and playing around with what's possible in the virtual realm, but in order to share some kind of digital piece. And every week when we have a meeting about that, I'm learning new things. It's a whole new way of working and thinking. And also our traditional audience is generally over 65. You know, that they're the ones interested in the purity of the voices of the young singers we have, and then in the next generation of artists. And they tune in regularly and follow us wonderfully, but they're not necessarily the ones who are also in the digital realm. And it's interesting how we reach out to younger audiences and to people who may never have thought of opera as something that they would be interested in engaging with. but through the fact that it's very low risk to turn on a piece for 5 minutes, see if you like it or not. If you don't like it, you can switch it off in 30 seconds. You have to have a very different mindset about the work you're producing, but also which platforms you use to get it out there. And we traditionally have been courting quite a different audience, and in these times also want to maintain our existing and loyal supporters. So it's been a dialogue backwards and forwards about where's the right place to place our work, and looking at the audience analytics when they come through and seeing what that means to us. I think the joy for us has been seeing just how huge our reach is, how many people we've been able to engage with. It's mind-blowing, actually. We've just put out a couple of 5-minute shorts, which were commissions we made last year by female teams, which were meant to be 5-minute pieces as part of a recital in the crush room. So again, they would have had an audience of 120 odd. And instead, they're getting thousands and thousands of viewings online because we decided to capture them. That's really thrilling for librettists, text writers, because these are songs, not actual operas. But for them to get that exposure and to be able to share that on their own platforms as well is just thrilling.
Absolutely. And it must be very different for the performers as well. The young singers you have on your course must find it different to just sing to a camera. When we talk about opera, especially the main stage, it's quite huge. The acting and the presence is very different. Has there been any training or even just conversations around that with the young artists?
To be honest, they've had to sort of learn it on the job. We have had training in the past, but the difference is this time is that they're not swinging backwards and forwards between being on the main stage and singing to a live audience, and having to reach people right at the back of the amphi. This time they're only doing stuff on camera. And that's very different because they get into the groove and then they stay in that groove. But it has taken a while for them to know, well, should I be following the light that I see on whichever camera's there? And the answer is no. You just do your performance as if it's live and let the camera find you. And so the TV director we work with has been giving a lot of feedback as they go along about what works and what doesn't work. One of the harder things is in ensemble concerts, particularly when they're having to introduce pieces and then sing them. That going from speaking, because they have to wear lapel mics to do the speaking part of it, and then suddenly to using their full voices without an awareness of the mic, which then gets completely switched off. That's quite hard to get your head around. But again, they've just taken to it like ducks to water. I'm really impressed, partly because they've just had to be on it. You only get one opportunity for a live stream, so you don't actually get time to get too fussed about it. And then because they're able to watch back at their leisure, they can learn by watching themselves, and they know the difference between a good performance and a bad performance when they're watching the screen. They're watching Netflix the whole time. They can see if it reads well or doesn't read well. So it's a kind of mixture of both. It's both self-learning and guidance from the people in the opera house who are doing the work.
That actually leads me to my next question, which is, well, I don't know if you'll be able to answer to this because I know it's not a young artist production, but Current Rising is and I'm just going to read it out so I don't get it wrong. So Current Rising is a unique collaboration between the Royal Opera House, Audience Labs, and then award-winning Figment Productions and Royal Holloway, University of London. So there's a lot of people working on this, which is basically a piece combining hyper-reality opera with virtual reality and a multi-sensory set. So it sounds very technological. Right? Could you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, well, that was the reason why we got kicked out of the Limbury, because that poor show opened and closed on the same day, and I was lucky to see it the day before it didn't open. So it takes a lot of kit to set that up. So essentially that is sitting waiting for its audience now, which meant that we couldn't take it out, do our show and then put it back in again, because of virtual reality. The cabling for that is quite some deal. But it's a fantastic experience. You go in, you put on your headset and backpack, and then it's so realistic that you get given instructions for where you should go, and you're essentially standing on the Limbury stage but seeing a completely different world. But it was terrifying because it's so realistic that I would not go to where I was asked to go to, because it was a huge drop. and it obviously was not a huge drop, but I was terrified, and I was edging my feet along, and I had to ask for someone to escort me to where I was meant to go, because the world was too plausible, and I just got very nervous. But it was a beautiful experience. I mean, there was some lovely texts and lovely poetry. It was just like being in a very surreal and gorgeous landscape, an installation, really. Just lots to watch and think about and be stimulated by, almost like a play pit for adults. It's beautiful, and the good news is that will come back. We've left it there so that the moment the audiences are allowed back in, that's what they can book for. And I felt so proud of the Royal Opera House when I came out of seeing that, because it really is unique and new, and it's great that we have developed the partnerships to be able to do that kind of work.
It sounds very exciting and very different. Do you see this as something that it could be a new direction where opera might be heading?
It's absolutely a new direction. It's an expensive direction, but I guess, again, with the future of potential partnerships and the gaming industry, there could be ways of making that cost fall to more commercial bodies, rather than a subsidized art form in the longer term. And so I think it's definitely worth investing in. The experience that people have had in lockdown is that they want to participate in an art form. They don't want to just sit there trapped in their seat for 3 hours and have it done to them. They want something a little bit more participatory if they can have it. And I think this is one way of allowing an audience to experience the full kind of 3D kinesthetic experience that opera can be. But I think early days as well, because we can't expect artists who are used to creating a live experience to immediately be able to translate their skills successfully 100% to a whole new medium. It's going to take a little bit of trial and error and playground time.
You mentioned something that I think is really, really important, that while lockdown was happening, or while the pandemic was kind of peaking, you found it very important to reach out to freelancers and also to do training and to reach out to different networks. And I wanted to ask you about what you discovered through that, because we talk a lot on this show about how, well, first of all, streaming is reaching a lot of different audiences, and it's in a way making it more accessible, even for people who can't be in a building at 7:30 for different reasons, or maybe across borders they can watch shows. So that's definitely one thing. But on the other side of it is just the kind of support that freelancers or artists have been receiving during this time has really made us reflect on how the arts really works and how we as freelancers work in the arts. Do you have any thoughts on this, or was there anything that you learned during this time as someone who is part of an institution?
Oh gosh, learned so much. And actually, I think the lessons of the pandemic for us as an industry are fabulous. I think people have really understood much more deeply what their values are and what is acceptable and unacceptable. I mean, there's a lot we've known, but we haven't necessarily felt empowered to voice or to absolutely insist upon. And I think people have learned to value themselves as artists. The public at large has missed art. They've missed coming together for a live experience as a community, and artists have missed that dialogue that there is with an audience in a space, unmasked. One of the things which is really great is people have gone inward and recognized what really makes them tick. So those people who really have to do art because it's absolutely who they are, I think have been able to find a really deeper sense of self and what they want to express, why they want to express it, and whether the economic circumstances of creating the work that they want to work on are possible or not possible. They have banded together with other people to go, how can we lobby for what is necessary for us to create the circumstances to do the art that we want to do? And can we do a different type of art? Do we have to work within the structures that exist or have been offered to us hitherto? And people are being really creative about the contexts in which they're working, as well as the work they want to make. And they've had more time to get off of the treadmill. You know, we're not hamsters running around this wheel anymore of turning up for our jobs and then going home and doing whatever we need to do at home and then getting back on the tube in the morning. That stopped. So we've had that reflection space to go, why do I do this? And so now we're coming out of it going, this is why I do this. This is what I want to do. I've had time to connect with like-minded people and like-minded creative people about how we can change things. And there's been a lot of reevaluation in society at large with, you know, thanks to the Black Lives Matter movement, you know, onward work of the Me Too movement, about how we look after people. And artists above all else want to connect person to person. And we've seen the inequalities that exist both within our sector and within society at large. And artists want to address that. And we need to look at funding structures. We need to make sure that things are less London-centric, that things are probably less big institution-centric. There's an awful lot of fantastic grassroots work going on. And artists who want to do, you know, scratch projects that are really exciting and need to be given breath and chance and hope. And I think the world is beginning to see the value of that, and not just, you know, the palaces. You know, there's a place for heritage and respect for the past, but there's also a need for newness, freshness, particularly new and fresh ways of thinking and new contexts for working, and new and respectful working practices. You know, the hierarchies that have existed in many of the arts, and certainly within opera, I don't think people are going to put up with them anymore. And I think that's terrific. You know, I've worked with a lot of lazy directors and lazy conductors. You know, you do hear the stories of people who come into a rehearsal room for the first time and you hear the crack of their score opening when they're about to conduct something. It doesn't happen very often. I'm not saying it's prevalent, but that it should happen at all is absolutely shocking. And I don't think that will be happening anymore. I think everyone who wants to make art is passionate about making it well and with deep integrity and with deep respect for their collaborators. And I think that's going to really enrich the work.
Are there specific examples you could list of these grassroots initiatives that you kind of noticed?
We're very lucky in the UK that we have a gathering of people involved with arts management called What's Next that happens every second week. It's a fantastic place for creative conversations about how arts and politics and society should meet, the role of arts in supporting thriving communities. And so that has given me lots of food for thought and has made me realise just how many organisations there are out there doing the most amazing work, which frankly, when I was in the office from, 10 till 7 and then going to see an opera every evening of the week, I wasn't aware so much of what else was going on. And it's just so nourishing to understand how many people are doing fantastic work on so many different levels and planes. And I've really valued the opportunity to connect more with networks that I wasn't a part of and wasn't aware of, because I was on this train-train of the daily grind. And it's been very stimulating for thinking afresh.
There are some young artists even now who are being part of the program remotely. I wanted to ask you, as someone who is working in opera, which is so international, has Corona and travel been more difficult for the house, and how are you working around it?
Yeah, well, the first thing that is a disaster for the house is Brexit. There's been some horror stories of people with all the right paperwork, all the right preparation, still being turned away at borders when they're arriving to work on a show.
Yeah.
And it's because they're British. And they're not allowed into Europe because of the combination of Brexit and the pandemic. I can't even begin to talk to you about the fury that I feel around Brexit and the short-sightedness and the selfishness of the people who put us through this. And they have decimated the economic realities, economic possibilities of a whole. community. And I'm just talking about the arts, not all the other communities that have been hit by it as well. So that's tough. You know, we don't know the full extent because we're not open yet. But we've already had people pull out of productions because they don't know how much the quarantine rules are going to change. And let's face it, each country in Europe can come up with a whole new relationship with the UK overnight. And we don't necessarily have the wherewithal to process that for multiple artists coming from multiple entry points and make a show happen on time, on schedule. It's worrying. So there's that. But then, you know, there are some positives as well. You know, it's great that there is less international flying. We're looking at how we're going to change the program in the future to make it more sustainable, so that rather than asking lots of people to fly in for auditions, we're going to be more active in local scouting. And when we do bring people over, we're going to be offering a series of masterclasses and coaching opportunities rather than just asking people to sing and go home again. So that it's really meaningful for them to fly over and spend a period of time with us and get something from that, whether or not they're then successful in getting into the program. And, you know, one of our young artists at the moment, they've all just come back for this project or for other work. But we have one who's still in Uruguay, and he is currently mentoring a whole group of artists who are going to do a concert with him in Uruguay. And some of our Jette Parker coaches are involved in Zoom coaching with them, some of which has to take place at 11 o'clock at night, because that's the only time that fits with their schedules, because these young singers are also doing day jobs. With the difference with their time zone and their day job restrictions, that's the time that we have to pitch up in order to support them. So we're trying to support him in that work there, because one of the things we like to do is to make sure, you know, our alumni, it's not that we like to do it, our alumni want to do it. They're interested in going back to their home countries and creating the kind of opportunities where they can also share and pass on again what they learned through being on the program and being in an international opera house, and share it with people who are coming up behind them.
It's the tentacles you mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, just reaching very far.
Yeah, and there's probably about 25 other projects, Francisca, that I'm not mentioning. You know, we really like to work in partnership with other organisations and give what we can to initiatives which are going to make a real difference where there aren't any other opportunities for support.
You also mentioned sustainability, and I just wanted to zoom in on that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, our last production, which closed 2 days before the lockdown, was all recycled materials, and was built then not to be kept. So we made sure that it wasn't full of hard plastics and things that you often have to make, you know, sustainable in the wrong sense sets, i.e. sets that are going to live for a long time, because you're going to revive it and revive it and revive it. So we now try and make sure that we make a decision straight away. Is this going to be revived or not? And if it's not, then we make it out of substances that are going to break down easily, or can be turned into components for use for other shows, or we use components from other shows and we assemble them and then deassemble them. With this show that we're doing at the moment, we're just using found things around the opera house, and we've got one large element that we're buying in, but we're actually hiring it, and then we're able to give it back. We were going to buy it, but then we thought, actually, if we take really good care of it, we don't need to buy it, do we? You could, and they went, sure. So we're just hiring it now, and that feels great, because I think what you will see is something that looks big and interesting and relatively expensive, and it isn't. It just isn't.
Sounds like theatre to me.
Yeah, no, we're really mindful of it. We don't look. I once did a revival, and I was told that I could, you know, have a decent budget to change it into something that update it, do what I needed to, and I went, you know, all I really need is a sack of potatoes. That's the main thing I want. That is an addition. The rest I can just work with as it is. I don't believe in spending money where you don't need to spend it. I do believe in spending money to make sure that the working practices mean that everybody can breathe and do their best and not go crazy in the process. You know, the scary thing about opera is that people are the main resource, and therefore if you have a limited time to get everything on, it's the people who are sacrificing themselves all the time to get the show on. And I'm hoping that after the pandemic would have seen that none of us want to work like that anymore. So we have to just think a little bit more thoughtfully about how we avoid that. And there are lots of conversations going on about how we, sustainability of people's health and well-being, as well as physical things. And I'm hoping that the culture of international travel and people flying in, delivering a performance, flying out again, or coming in and then missing 4 days of rehearsal because they have to go and do a concert in Zurich. I'm hoping that those days are now gone. And I think if they are lost, at least temporarily, I think artists will actually feel exhausted by the idea of going back to that kind of treadmill.
Yes.
Because although it's very lucrative, I hope they've seen the value of actually being in one place at one time and smelling the roses.
I wanted to talk a little bit about you and how you came to the Royal Opera House. Would you mind sharing that with us?
I was lucky enough to get a job because I spoke languages, and that's really a premium directing in opera. Someone who has the combination of speaking the languages and being a good administrator and being a good director, and enjoying being in a support role. It is quite an unusual combination of skills, and those as a package suited me. So I originally got a gig for a company called Opera Factory because they wanted a German-speaking assistant, and that was my first job in opera. And then from there, I wrote to loads of companies, and the Royal Opera wrote back and went, yeah, come in for a meeting. And I got one job, and then I got more and more jobs, really. Once you're in it, if you have the language skills, you are really useful to people, particularly as, a lot of operas have dialogue in them. And if you can direct not only the performances when they're singing, but also get acting performances from people when they're doing dialogue, particularly when they don't always speak those languages, then my background as the theatre director really helped with all of that as well. Yeah, I got into it, and I just stayed. And then they created an opportunity. I mean, it wouldn't happen now. Now everything would be advertised. But it was like, we probably need another person on our team. So would you be that person? And I just got given a job at the Royal Opera House on the main team. When my boss of 30 years left, that coveted job came up, and I got it. So I did it for a few years, and that was very exciting, being head of the team. And it was a beautiful team. I would say, often people think that directors are really competitive amongst themselves because naturally you're often up against your peers for the same gigs, and so you are natural competitors. But actually, I would say as a community, directors are probably one of the most supportive, mutually supportive groups you can hope to find. And I've loved all my colleagues over the years, and I feel really privileged to be with a group of people who just want the best for each other.
For me, this past year was a big wake-up call in that way, because before the pandemic, I didn't really have that many director friends, exactly because what you're saying, because it felt like we were all just going up for the same jobs and everyone was very secretive, maybe. And then when the whole world stopped, I just remember that I found so many different communities of directors who we just started learning together and sharing skills and ideas, and it just made it so much more less lonely. And you're absolutely right. Like, why shouldn't we create friendships with people who are our peers?
We're such a tribe. We really get each other. We've got so much to talk about, and yet we're also totally unique. Your bohème and my bohème would not look like each other's bohèmes.
That's true.
And that's the bottom line, is that we're interpretive artists, and we're all going to interpret from big differences in our histories and our lens. So we're not really in competition, because there's only one bohème gig at that place, and they only need one director, but they're going to want you for a different reason than me, and we're either going to fit or we're not going to fit. We just have to be the best of who we are, so that when we're asked to pitch for that gig, we pitch effectively what we're really going to deliver, and they get a flavour of what their audiences would see, and that we really learn how to articulate that before the show exists, and then to deliver it.
And since joining the Royal Opera House and now, have you seen any big shifts, or what was the biggest change you think that has hit opera?
Thank God, massive shifts. Shifts in terms of cultural shifts. You know, I have been on shows with where I've just put my head in my hands at the level of disinterest from some of the people who I've assisted, and incompetence, frankly. I mean, real incompetence. And I don't think any of those people, and this is quite some time ago now, but I don't think any of those people would get jobs anymore. I don't think they would even be considered for a fraction of a second. We're looking at much more sophisticated storytelling now and higher standards of behaviour in a rehearsal room. You know, we don't want bullying. We don't want people being spoken down to. We don't want you to be dismissive of an artist with a kind of passive aggressivity. None of that behaviour is acceptable. And we do now absolutely call people out on bad behaviour. And everybody knows that their backs are had if they experience something. And that's fairly new. I mean, I have had some really bad experiences in the past, and I have reported them. And they haven't always been taken to the nth degree where they should be taken. But now they are, and there's no question about it. So that's great. I also think that there is a genuine interest in new stories by new tellers, and an awareness of the barriers to many different individuals and communities to join something as hallowed as the Royal Opera in its scary big building, redolent for a lot of people of white privilege. And we're really aware of that now, and we're doing everything we can to work out how to break down both false preconceptions about what we are and true things about what we are that aren't helpful and that need to change. And I really feel that people's sort of emotional education around issues of accessibility, you know, anti-racism, anti-ableism, you know, all those things are being introduced into our thinking as a daily, regular point of reflection that we need to have on all the decisions we make, whether we're gatekeepers or whether we are just people walking around the building who influence the culture that we're a part of.
Yes, because the building in Covent Garden has a level of grandeur. It is a big building. And I think talking to people who aren't into opera, you know, friends of mine, when I say, why don't we just go get a drink at the Royal Opera House, it's insane to them that you can just go in and have a drink and look at the piazza. I think there's something about that is making opera almost a bit robust looking. And I was wondering if you think what you just said about streaming and that being able to provide online content without someone actually having to walk into the building, if that's changing. And is that something that you think keep on doing even when it will be safe to return to the building?
I think it is something we'll keep on doing, because we've realized that, particularly for our artists, you know, the young artists can have a really big international reach. And that includes reaching people back in their home countries. You know, Meet the Young Artists Week, we had a huge number of followers from Spanish-speaking countries because we had a couple of young artists from South America. And it was just wonderful to see that they could connect with the work that we were doing, which they wouldn't ever be able to see live. And we don't want to lose that. But it is more expensive, you know, once you've got freelance camera people coming in with their equipment, that's an extra outlay. Now, I think that's really worth it because it's part of accessibility to everyone. And then people can join in their own homes without actually venturing out. And that enables lots of people from all different circumstances and locations to connect with what we do. It's not the same as a live experience, and we'd never pretend that it is. But I think there is absolutely a place for online work and content. And I think the next big question for us is, to what extent should that content be as close as possible to the experience of a live audience member that's there? And to what extent should it be a bespoke offering for online only? And, you know, with Seven Deadly Sins, it's sort of beginning to be a bit of a hybrid. You'll see from how we're using the space that it's not been captured in a traditional way. On the other hand, we haven't created it as a movie. You know, we've got one camera watch and then we've got the take. So it has to be fairly close in the process, the shape of the process, to what we would do if we were preparing to capture a live show for an audience as a live stream or DVD. So, but it's a bit of a hybrid. So we'll see what. I mean, I'm so excited to see what it'll be, because none of us knows really what it's going to be at this stage.
That seems to be the theme of this pandemic, to be honest. Just not knowing what it's going to be, and then just writing it out and seeing what comes out on the other end. Where do you think opera will be in 10 years?
Couldn't possibly say. I think it'll be in a much better place. I also think people are fed up with the same old repertoire. I mean, it's both wonderful and a great sadness that there are so many fabulous composers whose pieces are now not necessarily speaking as loudly and clearly as they might to contemporary audiences. You know, we've been there, done that. The music is still sublime and varied and exciting, but we need to put some of those pieces down to create space for new pieces, new voices, new artists. And it's difficult to write an opera until you get experience of it, particularly an opera for a stage like the Royal Opera House stage. You know, that's a lot of forces that come together to create that, not only the ones you see and hear in the piece, but all the people backstage who make that happen. So that's an expensive venture, a lot of people's time and energy, and you're not necessarily going to write a great one straight away. So I think one of the big challenges is, how do we nurture the next generation of talent? You know, composing talent, writing talent. And that's one of the questions that occupies me at the moment is, you know, is there a place on the Young Artists Programme for us to support more of the repertoire creators? You know, do we want to embrace instruments outside the usual orchestral forces that we've got employed? Yep. You know, are we going to embrace different ways of singing, or do we want traditional classically trained singers? Are we able to invite jazz singers into the mix? If it's through sung, but it's with classical singers who are also trying different vocal techniques that they might be bringing from different genres, is that also still opera? And I think what's great is that nobody's really got a definition of what opera is. And when you make new opera, some people will go, well, that for me is definitely an opera. And some people will go, that for me is definitely not an opera. And there is no rigid definition. It just means work in Italian, doesn't it? So, you know, we can stretch it in many different ways, but the story is carried through the musical narrative. And generally speaking, it's not start, stop, like a musical where you've got dialogue, then a number. You know, we do have forms, but those forms may change. So I love the idea that I cannot answer your question. I don't know what opera will be like in 10 years, but I hope many more people will be involved in it from different walks of life. I don't want it to be mainly white men making this world. And I'm interested to see how different international fusions might create hybrid types of opera. You know, there's so much that it could become. I think it's really exciting. But there's a lot of issues to deal with first as well, you know, about the economics of it, the structures, the hierarchies, the gatekeepers. Quite a lot has to shift.
And what a great thing that you are, you know, at the Royal Opera House with so many other people working at those issues, because it's, you know, you are on the map with the Royal Opera House. So if you guys are thinking about it, then probably the whole industry is. So that's very, it's very promising.
Yeah, the whole industry absolutely is, but it's got to be not just thinking. We've got to be seeing action all the time. No resting on any laurels. There are no laurels to rest on. You know, this is a real imperative, and a super stimulating, energizing imperative, because we're just going to get better art as a result. Much better art.
Elaine, I have one last question for you, because I'm at the Ram Theatre. We have a 650-seater auditorium. If you were here with me, and if anything were possible, what would you make happen in this space?
I really want something interactive. You know, I think I'd love to gather, is it 650 people you said? I'd love to gather 650 people from your local community, from all walks of life in your local community, and do a day's fun around opera. introduce it, have it interactive so that everybody's got some kind of zapper which connects to the main stage, and we ask them loads of questions about who they are, what they think about opera, a lot of multiple choice, and we then have loads of pie charts that come up. Some of those pie charts might be graphics, some of those pie charts might be a whole bunch of a chorus creating a living pie chart, so that we can see the demographic of people we have, and then introducing themselves to different composers, different artists, letting them listen, letting them feedback through this interactive device, inviting them up through kind of hidden things underneath their seats. So who's got a purple thing under their seat? I have, right, can we have group purple up here? And we're going to send you off next door to tell your life stories, and in 2 hours time we're going to do a performance around your life story. But just a whole day of interaction where people learn a little bit about opera, different voice types, the repertoire. They're a part of creating new material. We learn what they think about it. We go, right, listen to this for a minute. How many people found that really off-putting? How many people thought it was thrilling? How many, and we start to see what this group thought, and have that dialogue together. I think I'm excited to learn about the audiences who don't currently come, and I want to know what they think.
I love that answer. I'm going to try to communicate that to our editing team, who's going to animate your answer at the end of this episode. So I think a singing pie chart, that's what we're going to go for. I love a singing pie chart. That sounds amazing. Elaine, thank you so much for coming on this show and for sharing all your wisdom with us. It was such a pleasure to listen to you, and I'm so excited for what is going to happen after May 17th when you reopen.
Yeah, I'm particularly excited for April 9th, though, when we do our 7 Deadly Sins.
Even though that's true.
That's my excitement peak at the moment, is that. Look, it's been lovely to talk to you, Francisca. All power to you. It's just so lovely to see somebody, young, whose work was taken away from them largely, set up a whole new other project and be creating waves. It's just fabulous.
Oh, thank you, Elaine. Thank you so much for coming. This was Traverse. Join us next time to see what's next for our industry.